myself.
Okay.
And I'm Steve Wolf, and according to my mother, who's not in this photo, she said that from the time I was 3 years old, if an airplane flew over, I ran outside, looked up. So now I'm 73, and I still run out and look up. So, and I still live at an airport. So, but anyway, this picture here was taken, I think, when we first moved to Vancouver, Washington. Up to that point, we lived in Sisters, Oregon, which is out in Central Oregon, right in the middle of Oregon. My dad worked for the U.S. Forest Service. He used his GI Bill to get a forestry degree, and I know a lot of people, and I heard you back there say you flew on the GI Bill and got your ratings and stuff. So anyway, I was number 2 out of the family, and my parents encouraged us to do things. In fact, if Dad took a nap on Saturday and we were running around the yard, the window would fly open. He said, "I'm trying to nap, so you got 40 acres to play in, get out of here." So we were encouraged to not hang around and go do stuff. And so what ended up happening is my youngest brother there, he raced motocross, and every picture Mom and Dad have of him was he was 20 feet in the air on a motorcycle zinging through. Jim, the next one, he was a mountain climber, so his pictures are hanging off of a cliff with pitons, anyway, and ropes, and he's hanging. That is his thing. Me, all my pictures is flying air show, aerobatic stuff. Charlie played the piano. He was a little different, the older brother, but that's kind of how we grew up. My dad used to fly fire patrol, and I was fire patrol observer. He was not a pilot. Even during World War II, he went in as a cadet. They washed him out on a medical thing, deviated septum, and so anyway, he was made a mechanic, so he worked on B-17. So I remember his photo album with B-17. So that might have struck some interest. But he would go as an observer in a Cessna 180 on fire patrol, and if I rode my bike to the airport, he'd ask the pilot, "Can I bring my son along?" And he's got eagle eyes. We could look for fires, So I'd get in the back seat of the 180 from the time I was about 8 until then. I think I'm just 13 there, maybe 12 or 13. But anyway, that's kind of how I had great parents. And when I wanted to learn to fly, we moved to Vancouver. Now there was airplanes. I mean, in Sisters, Oregon, there was a Cessna 180 and a Tri-Pacer that were brand new at the time in 1958 and 9. And the guy that owned the Cessna 180, he owned the ranch strip. The Sisters' only airport was a dirt strip. He ran a logging company. He was going out to have it graded one day, and he noticed this little kid that looked a lot younger than that at the time ride his bike out. I probably looked more like this. Ride my bike out to the airport, and he finally come out there and says, "Hey kid, you want to be airport manager? You're out here all the time." And I said, "Yeah, what does that entail?" "Well, I'm having the runway graded tomorrow with one of my graders, and it's going to turn up rocks." And he says, "I need every rock about this big off that." It was 3,600-foot runway, So for like 3 days, I walked that runway. I'm airport manager, get rid of the rocks, after he had it graded. And then he took me up in the 180. I was 11 then. I remember that because he let me fly it. I couldn't reach the rudders, but he let me fly it around for a while. And then the one thing that interested me, I remember he pulled it up before we landed, and it was Cessna 180, but all I saw was sky for quite a while. I think what he did was a big wing over like this and back down and out, because I saw the world laying on its side, and then I felt G-forces for the first time, and I went, "Ooh, this is kind of cool. I like this," and stuff. So that's kind of what got me interested. When we moved to Vancouver, it's like, wow, they have real airports like this, And so I pedaled my bike. It's about 5 miles, and it's not uphill both ways. It's up and down. And anyway, I rode the bike out, and I asked the guy at the FBO if they could teach me how to fly. And they said, "Well, yeah, we could teach you, but you got to be 16 to solo and stuff. But there's no age limit like a car. You don't need a learner's permit. As long as you're with the instructor, you can learn to fly." So I thought, that's great. So I go home. Best time to ask is when we're all sitting around the table, which back then everybody did, we sat around the table. I said, "Hey, Mom and Dad, I went to the airport today and they can teach me to fly, but I got to have your permission to do it. And can I get your permission?" I was all excited, and they both went, "Yeah, go ahead." And then they did the best thing that I think they ever did to me was, I said, "Well, it costs a lot of money." And my mother, being a depression child, goes, "Now that's your problem, not our problem." And that's the way it was. So summer vacation came. I was 13, and my birthday is in July. In fact, it's in a few days, isn't it? Yeah, it's July 20th. And so I summer vacation when I was 13 to turn 14, I went out and got a job picking fruit, and it took a full week of picking fruit. And I finally had my $11, which back then it was $11 an hour for dual and a champ. And went and got my first lesson. Well, Howard Poe that ran the FBO, he was a B-24 commander in World War II, flew his 50 missions and stuff, and really a good guy. He liked kids too, and I think he liked the free labor, basically, almost free. But anyway, when I wasn't complaining, but I told him how it took a week to buy an hour's lesson. He says, I could really use somebody around here to pump gas and wash airplanes and keep the fleet going and stuff, and on rainy days work with the mechanics in there and stuff. And I thought, wow, that's a lot better than being out in the field. And so that's what happened. I got a job and learned to fly, and I was really lucky in that his son, Kenny Poe, who was my instructor, because he was free. Howard didn't have to pay his son, to fly with me. So I'd do this work, and then all he bought was the gas for the champ, His son was teaching me to fly. Well, his son was working on his instrument, his CFII, and he used me as a guinea pig student after hours. So I got a lot of nighttime in a Cessna 120, and it was just turning. It wasn't even a horizon in there. I mean, it was a turn and bank and a gyro compass and no landing lights. So I learned my night flying with no landing lights and just a basic old Cessna 120 and needle ball and airspeed was what we did. So I'd sit in left seat, Kenny would talk me through it. Well, he got me pretty well checked out, and by that time, end of summer came, and he goes, he says, he kept telling me, God, it's too bad you're not 16. You're ready to solo. You could solo. Well, Mom and Dad didn't seem to mind me living at the airport. So during summer vacation, Howard had a cot upstairs in the attic, and I'd spend about a week until Mom and Dad would say, don't you think you need to come home and get a change of underwear and socks and stuff by now? And I thought, I guess I probably do. But anyway, they didn't see me too much. And Howard always had the Velveeta cheese, brown bread, because he believed the whiter the bread, the sooner you're dead, and Kraft sandwich spread, and that's what I lived on, and bologna, and that was my stuff, and Coca-Cola out of the pop machine in the morning. So anyway, I'm sleeping upstairs, and it was a beautiful night. I was just turned 14, and the beacon's going. I could see the flashing light through the attic there, the green and then the white, and I couldn't help it. I went down, and I went down and I thought, wow, they got this book that they keep track of time on the airplane because it had a recording tack. So I unhooked the tack. I worked with the mechanics long enough to know that's just finger tight. So I undid the tack cable, can't record time, and I took off in the Cessna 120 for my first solo when I was 14. And I took off, and it was Pearson Field in Vancouver, and there's the Interstate 5 crosses right at the end of the runway, and the Interstate Bridge across the river, which, and I'm climbing out, and I'm probably 150 feet climbing out, and all of a sudden I start getting smoke in the cockpit. And I look down, and there's this blue flashy stuff all around, like flickering all around the floor. And what I didn't realize when I unscrewed and just dropped that, the end of the tack cable got on the hot side of the bus, or on the bus. Luckily it was on the other side of the master switch, and it was dancing and arcing down there. So now I'm doing my first solo with an emergency deal. I go, oh, 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 oh. And Cessna's got those little paddle switches. I reach over and I hit the master off, and I go, and it stopped. It was like, oh, good, no more sparks, everything's fine. Luckily, Kenny always taught me to fly by attitude, and all I could see was, there's no instrument lights, there's nothing, it's just black in here, except I could see the cowl, and I knew if I kept the nose where I could see over it won't stall. I couldn't see the airspeed or anything. So my first solo, I flew around the pattern, came in, I remember that Cessna gear going boing, boing, and I finally got it stopped down there, and they had a paved runway and a grass runway in the FBOs. And I turn off, and there's this angled taxiway. You guys aren't going to believe this. This actually is a true story and stuff. I can remember it like it was yesterday. And I start taxiing in, and Howard was a mall dealer, and malls just came out in 1962. This is 1963. So he's got his brand new mall that his son just ferried from the factory and out there. But his son was my instructor, who was 19 at the time. All of a sudden, I'm taxiing back, no lights on the airplane, everything's turned off, I'm sneaking in, and all of a sudden, this is like 10:30, 11 at night, the mall comes taxiing around the corner. and it's got 2 landing lights, one in each wing, and it's coming right at me. And I just stopped and go, oh God, I'm going to jail. I stole the boss's airplane. I'm just like, oh. And and I thought, the only person who flies the mall is Kenny, my instructor. He's going out flying tonight. Who would ever dreamt that? And I'm done, And it comes and parks right next to me. It lit me up, comes over and stops. Guy gets out, runs over, and I'm just sitting in there like, uh-oh. The door opens. It wasn't Kenny. It was his younger brother, Ron, who's 16, who's a student pilot. And he acted like I probably flew all the time. He opens the door and he goes, hey, Steve, why don't you put the 120 away and come up with Linda and I, his girlfriend. We're going flying over Portland tonight, So he taxied back. I got in the back seat of the mall. We all went flying around Portland that night. And that's my first solo story. I mean, it was, and so whenever I talk to Ron and I talk about writing a book, I go, is it okay to use your name in the story? And he says, why don't you leave that part out, And I learned later, I was doing one of these talks, Vancouver, and there was a lady from the Seattle FSDO sitting in the front. I didn't know she was with the FSDO. And when I started to tell this story, this is 40 years after the fact, she stopped me and said, there is no statute of limitations on FAA breaking FARs. She says, we could still violate you today if you admit doing something wrong 40 years ago. And I thought, wow. Well, now, if I write the book and somebody comes up from the FAA, I'll just say, oh, I write fiction. But anyway, you got to try to prove it. So anyway, that's kind of how my solo went. And I got into flying and stuff. I went on to, get my private and instructor rating. I started learning aerobatics when I was 14 because I was ready to solo. Wally at another airport, 4 miles bike ride the other way, had a Waco UPS 7. This will tell you how long ago. $18 an hour dual for aerobatic instruction, a half-hour minimum. So I'd save up. Howard paid me 3 cents a gallon for pumping gas, so working there because he felt I needed some spending money. But then he got pissed because I was saving up the spending money and going to spend it another FBO. But I said, well, if you had a Waco or a Stearman, I'd spend it with you. So anyway, that's kind of how I grew up. Why don't you go to the next photo? So once I learned aerobatics, man, I wanted to be an air show pilot. And I talked my older brother, Charlie, the piano player, into buying an airplane and learning to fly because he had money and a job, and I didn't. So he bought this Champ 82960, and I could take care of it for gas and oil. I mean, if I paid for the gas and oil, I could fly it all I want, and I did oil changes and just, I babysat it. But later, when he got married, his wife said, we don't need an airplane, we need furniture. So he came to me and said, I need to sell the airplane. I'll sell it to you for $1,450, about what he paid. And he said, back then that was a going price. He said, no money down, $80 a month. And I didn't know where I was going to get $80 a month, but I started a wax and wash airplane business. I knew how to do that, and charged $15. So every weekend I had to do 2 airplanes so I could make payments on my Champ. But this was my first air show airplane. Now I'm doing aerobatics. So in 1969, I discovered that I want to do air shows, but I got a Champ. What do you do with an old 65-horse 7AC? Well, I discovered it loops almost as good with the engine at idle as all 65 horses running. And if you just add 10 miles an hour, I used to loop it all the time at like 110, 115, but red line's 129, but if you go to 120 or 125, it loops real good. So I went up and I practiced a dead stick routine, shut the engine off, start with a spin and go around. And people said it was hard to see because I started at 4,000 feet, so I painted the wingtips black, hoping that the yellow and the black would show up better. But anyway, that was my first air show airplane. And so from the time I was 19, I started flying shows, and then I saw something at the air shows that I just fell in love with. Lonnie Boone had a brand new Pitts S1S, very similar to Kathy's out there, and made a knife edge pass all the way down the runway, added top rudder, and started climbing. And then he came in and he did a vertical 4-point roll, and I was like, airplanes can't do that. So I had to have one. Sent Curtis Pitts my $100, and one thing I got to tell you that my Howard Poe that ran the FBO was like my second father, In other words, one day he gave me something to do in the hangar. I wish I could remember what it was. I can't, but I keep trying to think someday I will. And I said, Howard, I can't do that. He said, what'd you say? I said, I can't do that. He says, can't never did a damn thing. He says, if you tell yourself you can't do something, you'll never do anything. So when it came time to build the pits, it's like, yeah, I can learn to weld and weld up a frame and do that, you know. And by then I was married with a child. At this time I was too. I discovered girls probably earlier than I should have. And anyway, go ahead and go to the next one there. So this was me back then when, you know, lots of hair, good old sideburns. 1976. This is at Abbotsford, British Columbia air show in 76. And I had a friend in the metal plating business. I painted it midnight blue and gold trim. And he came and saw it and he says, let me gold plate your spinner for you. So that spinner's got 24 karat gold plating on it. And unfortunately, it started corroding off the aluminum. They didn't get along too well, and I ended up sanding it off down the thing. Anyway, so that was my air show airplane, and I love the pits. It was like, oh, now I got power instead of dead stick, you know, and stuff. And go ahead and see what we got next. So at Abbotsford, British Columbia, I had that picture in 1974. Abbotsford always has a guest of honor. Well, the guest of honor that year, one of those years, 74, was King Hussein of Jordan. And King Hussein, as a performer and everything, you get to meet the guest of honor and all that stuff. And I met General Davis, you know, the African American from Tuskegee Airmen, and all that was one time there. There was a lot of different people. Well, it's good to be the king, I discovered, because getting to know him led to a job in Jordan, putting together an aerobatic team for Jordan. Now, I've never flown a Pitts S2. He bought 3 Pitts S2s. And for any of you guys that flew airlines or do fly airlines, he wanted his airline pilots to have recreational flying. So my job, I was hired to go teach. I ended up flying probably 40 or 50 airline pilots. Most of them were Arabs, Jordanians. I did fly, they had a couple Australians and stuff, and an American that I flew and checked out. But I'd check them out in the pits, and then we decided to put an aerobatic team together. And it's still, that was 1976. It's still, Royal Jordanian Falcons just bought 5 new airplanes. That team is still going, that I went there, and I was the initial director of operations and started training those guys back then. And at this picture, I'd just flown a solo performance for His Majesty, and they had these suits made up. This is Ali Gandour, who was president of the airline, and then the king, he's got a cigarette in there. And something I want you to notice is, if you look, you'll see he's got a gold Rolex GMT. There's the watch. And he saw me heading off. It was right after this. I was heading off to the States for vacation. He was seeing dignitaries off, so they held all the passengers back. And when he started leaving, I would just happen to be up front, and he saw me. He came over, and he asked where I was going. I told him I have a 30-day vacation. And at that time, that morning, I could not find my $20 Timex. I literally couldn't. It must have been fate, because where the heck did I do my watch? I got to get going. I'm going to miss the flight. And with that, he took this watch off of his wrist and gave it to me. And not being a guy that only lived at airports, I was not a man of the world. I didn't know what a Rolex was. I just knew, wow, that's a fancy watch. It's sure heavy and stuff. That's the way I was. So I get on the airline, I get looking, I go, wow, it's kind of pretty. It's got this, you know, oyster and stuff. And I thought, well, Rolex rhymes with Timex. It's got to be close, you know. But coming from him made it extra special. And on that same flight back, I did a flight to New York to Seattle, going home. The guy next to me is reading a newspaper back then, and he opens it up, and there was like a quarter-page ad for Rolex, and it had a picture of this watch, gold Rolex back then, $3,350, and I found out. But anyway, so King Hussein put the program together. It did piss off some of the airline guys because I was flying a Pitts Special. I actually have in Jordan a Pitts S2A type rating. You have to be type rated in every airplane you fly. It's not by weight. I could not fly the Cherokee 140s, which I probably had 500 hours in, because I didn't have a type rating for the Cherokee, but I could fly the Pitts there. And I was paid $707 captain salary to have the job, so I got treated really well. And he was a fantastic human being, and it was fun being in the Middle East there. And I got semi-fluent in Arabic back then. I can't hardly remember anything now, but it's been 40 or 50 years ago now, it seems like. But anyway, go ahead, Kathy. That was that chapter in life. And then I came back and I was so turned on to flying formation aerobatics. I taught a lot of it. I had about 1,200 hours of Pitts formation flying. And I came back and I flew an air show. The airport's down here, Henley Aerodrome in North Idaho. This is up, Coeur d'Alene's down there. This is up north of Coeur d'Alene. And I had there's my blue and gold Pitts with the gold spinner and everything. And I flew an air show up there, a solo performance when I got back. And Steve Soper, that ran the air show there at that air show, I said, this is beautiful country, man. If I had a job, I'd move here. Because I didn't have a job. I was just spending my Jordanian money and having fun I retired for a year. But anyway, by then the money is starting to run out. I thought, I can't do this too long. And anyway, Steve Soper says, well, if you want a job with Henley Aircraft here, we got our shop, you can move up here. So, okay, so I moved up there, went to work in the shop, and I needed to do an oil change on my Pitts, and I told Steve, I said, why don't you go fly the Pitts around, see what it's like. So I let him fly it, and about a week later, he bought this Pitts. That was it. His Fairchild 24 was sold, and he had a Pitts, and we put together the Northern Night Aerobatic, which was a dual team, and we flew together for about 6 years, 79, well, not quite that, I guess 5 years, to 84. At that time, Jimmy Franklin was popular with his big Waco with the 985. I was getting tired of doing this. I wanted to do a solo performance, and I saw a picture of the big Pitts Sampson, which Curtis Pitts built in 1949 down here in Homestead, Florida. And there it is. And I built a replica as best I could. I became good friends with Curtis, so he helped me a lot with some stuff. He didn't have drawings, but he burned up in a hangar fire he had in '67. But this is the one I built up as a replica. This airplane is about 600 pounds lighter than a Stearman, and this has a 985 Pratt & Whitney. And this engine was set up to pull about 500 horsepower out of a 985. And that prop, it doesn't really show it there, it's a Hamilton Standard two-blade, but they're normally 108 inch, 9 foot. This is 120, it's a 10-foot propeller. It's two blades out of a Boeing 247, which those were fun to find, which was a rare airplane. But it's a direct drive, so I had about 7 or 8 inches of each blade was supersonic on takeoff. You could hear that thing for 50 miles away, somebody'd hear me take off almost. That thing barked. It was one of the noisiest air show airplanes out there. That thing really howled. I remember Dick Van Grunsman of the Vans came over to me one day and he says, when you fly your air show, everybody's got to quit talking. He says, we're all over there like this, Anyway, that was my favorite air show airplane. That airplane climbed an honest 45-degree angle on a normal takeoff deck angle. If I took off on a 2,000-foot runway, I could have 2,000 feet at the end. If I took off out of Missoula, Montana one time, and you're starting out a little over 3,000 feet above sea level, and going across the Bitterroot Mountains, I needed to be at 8,500 going home. I took off out of there, climbed 8,500, leveled off, set up my cruise power, then I banked up and I was at the departure end of the runway. And it was like a 7,000-foot runway, but I had 8,500 feet at the end of the runway. So you could just pull it back, rotate off the ground, go right back to about a 50-degree deck angle and leave it there, and it actually accelerate a little bit and just keep going. I set a world time to climb record for the C1B category with the airplane. So it was fun. That airplane will do this is Cresswell. I did a loop on takeoff at Cresswell, and the windsock, I was vertical, but I accelerated 110, came off the ground, did an easy loop, made sure here I eased it up, had my 700 feet because it'd come around in 500. So I got 700, came back around. When I was vertical, I was across from the windsock. I've asked the airport manager, I said, how far is it from the end of 3-3 there to the windsock? It was 900 feet. So, and basically 1,000 feet I could do a loop on takeoff. It's just like a helicopter, that big rotor. And that was the fun one. Then, back when I was flying with the Northern Nights, Delmar Benjamin bought my blue and gold Pitts and continued flying with Steve Soper. We were all weathered in Rapid City, South Dakota. Snowstorms blew through. We just made it in there, and we were sharing a hotel room. And Delmar, who's a man of few words, talks like Clint Eastwood we got talking about the GB and its bad reputation and this and that. And Delmar finally goes, there was a GB out there, I'd go fly it. Finally, him and I got talking about it, and we thought, well, let's build one and see how it flew. But you know, a lot of people, since he did, it's sitting up at Kermit Weeks's right now in Polk City. Since he did put 1,600 hours on it, everybody figured we made a lot of changes. There was only 2 changes we made: Cleveland wheels and brakes, because the original had shoe heel brakes, cable operated, and now we're going to land an airplane that stalls at 100, 105 on paved runways, and we put a swivel and tail wheel instead. The original R2 was actually locked. It was just straight, and they just on the grass they could skid it around a little. So we made that lock and unlockable. We put Bendix fuel injection on it because it had individual exhaust stacks. And later, there you can see the exhaust coming out there. But the stacks were so short, we couldn't really figure a way to get good carburetor heat. You can ice up a 985, so we decided to put fuel injection. But aerodynamically, people said, oh, you added more wing, you did this and that. Actually, I sanded the tip bow a little too much. Instead of a 25-foot wingspan, it's about a 1/4 inch short. So the wings it was built aerodynamically exactly as the original. We had enough access to information. And then he flew, there's Delmar standing with the Bumblebee killer airplane. And he discovered, you know, that airplane was flyable airplane. It was difficult to fly, but it just needed, as he says, you just need a pilot. And back then, most of those guys that flew the airplane were flying travel air biplanes with a 6-pound wing loading, and it wouldn't even go 100. And this thing stalled at 100 or 105, and it had a 30 to 40 pound wing loading. It was only 73 square feet of wing area. So that was, and so Kermit ended up, and that a lot of people got to see a GB fly. If you ever see the documentary, I was a little heavier then, a lot heavier. I mean, and people go, I don't think that's Steve Wolf. He doesn't look like him, but you'll see me giggling and laughing, and I'm jumping up and down when he makes the first flyby, because I never thought I was going to see a GB fly in my lifetime either, and stuff. So anyway, that kind of led to Jim Wright wanting to build. He saw what I did with the GB, and he lived 8 miles away, and he wanted to build the Hughes H1 replica. And since I was into woodwork and stuff, I built the all-wood wing. That's actually, I consider that my wood masterpiece. I built a lot of pit swings and stuff, but that all plywood skin. His tolerance for the skin for that airplane, he wanted to be able to put a 6-foot straight edge across the wing and not be able to pull a piece of paper out anywhere. I mean, he was a really picky guy. And so, man, and the plywood on that wing is a 1/2 inch thick. It's 4 laminations, an 1/8 inch here, and it keeps stepping down till it's 1/8 out near the tip. So you had to plan all the ribs to be at different levels, and it was quite a project. There's a good shot of it in flight. It was built it actually has the original Hughes H1 when it went in the end number. When it went in the Smithsonian, they never turned it. They turned the number back. Nobody ever picked up that end number. So the airplane actually ended up with the real. Unfortunately, it threw a counterweight on the way back, off the propeller on the way back from Oshkosh, and the arm broke, threw the counterweight, and he ended up landing in Yellowstone Park. But unfortunately, there was a lot of people out. It looked like a field, but it turned out it was a geyser, one of the guys where people walk around. He saw the boardwalks, and according to the witnesses, he made a turn over toward the river probably when he saw the people. And anyway, it caught a wingtip cartwheel, and the airplane's lost. He was killed. The airplane had 37,000 man hours went into the building of that. Then, you remember what I said about can do or you can't do or whatever? Well, in '93, I started building Sean D. Tucker, the Oracle guy that back then was 1-800-COLLECT, and actually Randolph Sunglasses, 1-800-COLLECT, and later Oracle. So Sean, I was at Oshkosh, and I got this. This story is a pretty good one. I was at Oshkosh, and first time I kept hearing about this wild kid from, it's like 1993, and it's this wild kid from California that just really rings the pits out. Never seen him fly, but I heard. But at Oshkosh, Curtis Pitts was there, and I was there, and Curtis, we're standing there watching him fly for the first time. We were speechless. I mean, if everybody ever, especially when he was that young, he was really wild back then. He wound that thing up so much, and he knew Curtis was watching. He didn't know me. I mean, I was flying Samson in the air show, so he knew me from briefing and stuff, but really I'd never really spent much time with him. And so Sean comes up, and I stand with Curtis, and Sean comes running up there, and Kathy's flown 10 hours with Sean. She knows how he is. He comes up there, well, Curtis, what do you think? And Curtis goes, you're too damn hard on the airplane. He expected to be a patted on the back, you know. And he goes, well, I only pulled 10 G's on it. And Curtis goes, you know, I designed that airplane to break at 9. And I'd never heard anybody say it that way, you know. But Sean didn't even change his face expression. It was kind of like, well, it's staying together. I guess it's okay, you know. So anyway, when Sean went trotting off, Curtis turned to me. He knew by then I was building a lot of pit stuff, and I knew him quite well, doing a lot of modification stuff that he approved of. And he turned to me and he says, Steve, if I design a set of 12G wings for that airplane, would you build them if I go talk to him? And I said, yeah. So that's how I got to where I was building Sean's stuff. So I built the 12G wings, and Sean's still alive. We'll talk about that a little later. But anyway, so there's this young med student, Weiss T. Coleman III, who was flying an S2B in air shows, and he was one of the proteges, I guess, of Sean's proteges, and he was bringing him up, and he was flying a stock Pitts S2. So Weiss calls me one day and goes, and he's like in his early 20s, and he goes, hey, Steve, he was from Louisiana, you know, Shreveport. He goes, Steve, could you build me an airplane that'll outperform a biplane that'll outperform Sean D. Tucker's airplane? I said, sure. Because I've been building his stuff. All you got to, every time you build something, you know, if I did it again, I'd do this, you know. So it's like, all I got to do is top. Well, this is the first Pitts I built that had this wing design like this coming around. And, well, actually, I guess I'd built the 8 aileron wings is another story. But anyway, this tail is carbon fiber. So it's all carbon fiber tail and bigger surfaces. The wingtip, the leading edge sweep back of here, and a bunch of stuff. And you notice it's got long ailerons, really good roll rate and stuff. It is true, I did build it. He had Challenger 1, which got lost when the guy went in a storm and bad weather, flying cross country as ferry pilot. He lost that, and he had Challenger 2. And Challenger 2 is the one I built the 8 aileron wings for. And by 8 ailerons, we put ailerons all the way in, had one set and another set, and I'll show you, I got a picture of it later. But anyway, so we get this airplane flying, and it was totally amazing. This thing just tumbled, and just, I mean, I remember Kathy was flying formation around me with her Pitts, the little green one out here, and I was flying that airplane, putting the 40 hours on it. And I was doing a loop, came up here and started doing snaps on top. We call it an avalanche. I went around about 4.5 revolutions. I was still sitting on top. I haven't started down the backside yet. So I stopped it there. So now I came up this way, snap, stop, pulled it, and hovered. And it would hover on that prop. It almost had 1-to-1 thrust away. It had almost 400 horsepower. And I went up there, stopped, and just hung it there for like 5 seconds. Then I just did a forward flip. It has such a powerful elevator. You can go full, you got to use full rudder and full forward, and the thing just pivoted right over. Now it's sitting on top of the loop inverted, and I flew out inverted off the top of the loop going the other way. So the airplane is, and the other thing that just happened by chance, I mean, I'd like to say I designed it, and that was my whole deal. Most airplanes, you trim it, and when you're pulling G's, you know, you got it set pretty good. When you roll inverted, it wants to nose down, because of the download on the tail for stability. When you roll over, that download tends to push, so you got to hold more forward stick. The airplane goes out of trim. This airplane stays pretty much in trim. You do like an inside-outside loop, you're pulling about 4 or 5 pounds on the stick. You come down the backside, you push about 4 or 5 pounds, it goes right around. It is an amazing tail. So he let Tucker fly it. Then Tucker gets a hold of me. I got to have that fuselage and tail, you know. So anyway, go ahead to the next one. So these are just some of the chapters. So here's, I think Eric Tucker flying and Sean flying on this. So while I was building the new Challenger 3, Weiss was still having to stay more in med school than he wanted to, and stuff. And I noticed that I was building it for Weiss T. Coleman III, but all the checks came from Weiss T. Coleman II. So, and he was a doctor. So I think as long as you stay in med school, you'll end up with an airplane. I think that was the deal between father and son. That's the way it looked. So anyway, so here's the Challenger 3, and if you look, there's a plate in between, but it's got the inboard wing goes to there, aileron, and then our inboard's here, and then the outboard's here. So there's inboard. What that was for, he likes to go up and hover. The problem is the torque starts taking over and you start doing a torque roll. You can't hold it, it'll go. The idea was if we could get enough prop blast, we could hold it. The problem is, you think, well, why not just build a full span aileron? Well, we tried that on another one, and it had such bad adverse yaw. If you did real fast roll rate, it rolled real fast, but the nose wanted to go around, and you had to really pay. So I came up with the idea at 3 in the mornings when I do my best. I wake up, and I thought, well, what if we make the inboards move less than the outboard, so they move half as much as the outboard, because the outboard is where the angle is going the most. When you get into the middle of the fuselage, there's no angle change, it's going around. So when you're out in this area, you really don't need all that aileron. I mean, you wouldn't think of taking a Cessna and pulling vertical and going to 40 degrees of flaps to keep going, and that's what you're doing. You're putting all these flaps out there. Ailerons are just drag. So what we determined was, so Sean, when we got that airplane flying, he'd come in at 250 miles an hour indicated, pull 6 Gs to vertical. The airplane would go vertical to 2,800 feet. It's where it stopped, where it's hanging on the prop. Then he came in, same thing, 250, 6G pull, established the vertical, full aileron, do about 8 rolls going up, and it made 2,700 feet. So we were successful, and we only lost 100 feet of vertical with full aileron deflection. And the airplane had no ass. You could fly that airplane around, take your feet off the rudders, and just turn one way, turn the other. There was no adverse yaw. It really is an amazing airplane to fly. So that big Samson I talked about, after I met Kathy in 2001 and stuff, and we ended up she was my student. She learned aerobatics. In fact, I was building the Hughes wing at the time, and all I kept, I was building the Hughes, and Jim Wright hired me to build that wing if I don't get sidetracked, and I get sidetracked real easy. So he was like, you got to stay on that wing and get it done for me. And about then, I keep getting this call from a Dr. Hertz, right here, a physician and a Dr. Hertz that said, well, Patty Wagstaff said, you'd be a good person to teach me aerobatics. You live in the area. And I I don't want to teach some doctor aerobatics and stuff. I'm going to keep on this. Finally, but anybody knows Kathy very well, you'll find she's very persistent. She's like, would you at least come out and meet me and see my airplane and this and that? And she looked me up. We went over and loved her airplane. We flew it. It was a Zlin 242. We had fun playing around the clouds and stuff. And anyway, after we got married, and I'd sold Samson in '93 when I started building Sean's stuff, and I kind of got out of air shows for a while, Kathy goes, what airplane would you really like to build and have again? And I said, Samson was my favorite airplane, but if I did it again, I'd build it with 4 ailerons this time, shock landing gear, I'd do this. She says, well, why don't you build it? Why don't we build it? So we started building it. The problem is I was doing all this pits work, and Kathy put it on our website. We had a website, Wolf Aircraft Projects Under Construction, and we had that going. Well, then a German, Walter Meiss saw it over in Germany, calls, how much for the, I can't do a good German accent, but basically, how much for the Samson, and I'm like, so anyway, he made a deal that if I finished the airplane, he'd pay me this price, he'd give us a 3-week vacation in Germany, and we could ship it over in a container, but I could put the 40 hours on it in the States, and he'd pay me to fly it. He'd pay me $100 an hour to fly it, and I thought, wow, let's see, $100 an hour to fly it. I get to put my 40 hours. By then, I'll probably be tired of it anyway, and I've got to fly it. So we took it to Germany, put it back together. I did an air show for him in it, which I didn't. They had a control tower there, and he said the control tower approved you to do low-level aerobatics. So I finished the aerobatics, and after I was done, I asked Walter Meisch, I don't have a German pilot's license. I have nothing, and there was no waiver, nothing like we do here. When I'm all done, I said, Walter, weren't we supposed to, shouldn't I have a waiver? I mean, this is just doing a low-level show on the deck out here. And he goes, yeah, it's not legal, but I'll take care of it. And I thought, oh, great, turns out if anybody ever buys that Haribo candies, the gummy bears, the Haribo licorices and stuff, he owns the Haribo company. He brought a big box of Haribo out to the hangar one day, and Kathy goes, "Oh wow, we like buying that." He said, "Good, it's my company." So anyway, he had some money, so I billed him, and he designed the paint job, or his niece did, I guess. But anyway, so we took that one to Germany, and it did really fly nice. It's actually back in the States now. He had it for quite a while. He sold it to Tim Just has it in California. And so now we moved to Florida. We started an aerobatics school together, and I'm her chief pilot, and she's paying me. And I met Dr. Hertz, and everything was working good. We weren't married at the time, and she wanted to offer training to people in the Pacific Northwest because she had to go to California to get aerobatic training because nobody was doing it. She says, "I'd like to offer. I'll buy a Pitts and S2, and then have this Len. We'll make a school wing over aerobatics and stuff." So I was her chief pilot. I was getting paid, and I was hired to do the job. And eventually we got married, and I haven't had a paycheck since. That's what happens when you marry your boss. But anyway, so a guy built a quarter scale model of my big Samson. A guy, Henry Scheifrump, a German guy up in New York. And when he was a World War II vet. When he passed away at 91, his daughter called and said, "My dad's got this quarter scale model, super detailed. He won awards with it. And we don't need it. It's in the garage. And we're heading down to California on vacation. He has the trailer where he used to take an RC model out to the field. Would you like it?" So, sure. So I got it, and we hung it in the entryway of our house over here. And it was kind of diving down toward the couch. And one day I was laying on it, couch, looking at that, and I go, I got an idea. I kept looking at these Rotec radials, the little Rotec ones from Australia. And I always thought there's got to be something you can build around those. And so I knew that they were just under 3 feet in diameter. So I thought, well, this had the big Samson was a 4-foot cowl. Well, 3/4 scale, 3 foot. Okay. So I went and got my Samson drawings out. Oh, fuselage, 168 inches times 0.75. Came out 123 or 4 inches or something like that. And I go, oh, an S1's 121 and a half. So it was like an inch and a half longer or something. I thought, it's really just an S1 size airplane. Instead of 17.4, it's got 18-foot span. Instead of a 24, it's 18. So I built it as a 3/4 scale because I always wanted to put the Rotec in it. Unfortunately, it's a geared engine. The gearbox came apart at 13.67 hours on the tack. I had a forced landing. Luckily, I didn't. I got the airplane down without a scratch. And now, as you see it out here, it has the Werner radial from the Czech Republic. And it's a little bigger in diameter, but I did an engine conversion, and it's so far at 180 hours or so, it's doing good. Good enough for my next project. And that's a fun airplane. So, and see, I paint it just like the big one with my name on it and everything, but about 70% of the time it flies, Kathy's flying it. So, it's not Steve Wolf flying. I flew it in today, though. And then we had wing over aerobatics at Leesburg Airport, where we did the aerobatic school. And I was still working, and that was Kathy's Pitts S2B that she flew that we used in the school. And we had a guy come to us, the guy standing in the front seat. This is his 95th birthday, but he came to us, and Captain Jack Howlett, and came and said, I haven't flown an airplane in over 50 years, and I flew in World War II, and I just would love to see if I could still do some aerobatics. So Kathy took him out in the Zlin. She comes back going, you can't believe that guy was doing loops at like 2.7 Gs. The ball never left the middle. He said, I can't believe he hasn't flown an airplane for a while. And so he was about 2 months, he was 94, about 2 months away from 95th birthday. So we treated him 95th birthday to, you got to fly the Pitts. And got him in the front seat of the Pitts, and at 95 years old on his birthday, he taxied out, and I said, hey, Jack, you want to do the takeoff? And over the intercom, he says, yeah, but he says, the last tailwheel airplane I took off was a P-47 in Germany, 1945. I said, I'm with you. I didn't have to touch it. He just took off. He actually overcorrected for the torque, came to the right a little, straightened it out, and flew away. And he just became an amazing, so he said, I said, man, you flew in World War II. I wanted to hear some World War II stories. And he says, Steve, he said, we just had a job to do. He says, I went over, the real heroes are the guys that didn't make it. He says, we went over, we did a job, I came back, I went in the irrigation business. He said, I never told my kids what I did. You know, it was just that generation was different. But he understood we wanted to hear some stories. So he used to come and visit. There he is in January of 45 in Germany, flying an airplane, a P-47 he named Frigid Midget. He was over Normandy on D-Day in a P-38, all through the Battle of the Bulge P-38, and then after the Battle of the Bulge, they took the P-38s to the Pacific and gave them P-47s. And I have to say, there's an old adage. They wanted Mustangs, because some of the groups were getting P-51s and stuff. They really wanted Mustangs, because you were a favorite with the girls if you had a Mustang. If you're a Mustang pilot, to where the old Jug, you know, is like, oh, God, I got to find this big tank of an airplane. But the old adage is if you want to impress your girlfriend, you fly a Mustang. If you want to see her again, you fly a P-47. they would take a beating. So he named it Frigid Midget. And now that he's passed, I can tell the story. He told Kath and I how he named it Frigid Midget. He's 5'6", first of all, so I figured it's because he's a little guy. But he said when he was in England flying the P-38, that he said there was a British song that had the lyrics, "A frigid midget with a rigid digit." So you can figure out whatever you want. So he did put he put the rigid digit, one of them anyway, on flipping the Germans off on the cowl using a Disney Grumpy on there, and that's why he named it that. He's a real character. He unfortunately passed away a year ago and stuff, but that was his 4NQ. That's what he had on the P-38, and that's what he had on this olive drab airplane with a yellow cowl and stuff. But that was the big old fat airplane. So when COVID hit, and you know, none of us here knew what was going to happen, right? I mean, were we going to get locked down? Are we going to be able to travel again? Or what are we going to do? And I'm a project person, if you haven't figured it out. And I love building airplanes. I have three passions. Kathy's my first passion. And then I have building airplanes and flying them are equal. I have just as much fun building as flying. I mean, it's just the same. I can't say which one I like more. But I wasn't building an airplane at the time. We were flying because at Love's we're private. We'd go fly. But I just decided to build. So I popped up. I like the Werner engine. What am I going to do? Or what could I do? And it dawned on me. I called Jack the next morning, and I called Jack Howlett, and I said, Jack, you need to live to be 102 or 3. Why? I said, I want to recreate Frigid Midget. I want you to see it fly again. And I knew at the time it'd be maybe a 5% chance that would happen. But anyway, Jack wanted to help. So he, with his old bent up arthritic fingers and everything else, this is actually where the tail wheel comes out, where it folds in, the bottom skin. He came out and worked with me about through the morning. He'd show up about 8 and go home at noon after we fed him lunch. The funny thing, I got to tell you, is right here he's got the deburring tool, and you know, we got all these holes. It's all sheet metal airplanes. So he's deburring. Anybody's building an RV, you know. So he's deburring. But the next thing is dimpling the skins for the flush rivets, where you use a dimpling die, and it looks like a big C-clamp, and you bang away and you dimple it. Well, we'd give him a cookie. Kathy'd make a sandwich, liverwurst. He loved liverwurst. Make a sandwich. I learned he didn't like Cheetos, but anyway. So anyway, Jack would get his cookie. When I asked him to help me dimple, he goes, well, I got to check with the union on that. He says, because I'm a deburrer, I'm not a dimpler. He said, I think as a dimpler, I need a raise. And I said, how about 2 cookies? Okay. Well, later, where the turbocharger outlet goes, I used number 6 screws, so I drilled it up, and I needed to dimple to deburr it before I dimpled it. So I asked, hey, Jack, could you deburr these holes here? No, I'm a dimpler now. I'm not a deburrer. I'd have to check with the union to see if I can do that. So he was more fun, and that's infectious smile the guy had. And how many people in 2020 get to work on a World War II replica, even though it's scaled down to 60%, with the guy that flew it in World War II in 2020? I mean, you know, the guy in that picture, believe it or not, is 100 years old then. Yeah. And he drove himself out. He'd drive home at night sometimes in the rain and everything. And so I took it to Sun and Fun last year, where at the point it was at, and people asked, no, that is not the landing gear. The landing gear actually goes way out in the wing. It's got big tires and a bunch of stuff. But this was just a deal I rigged up where the front spar went, there's a middle spar and a rear spar, and these were, Rural King lawnmower wheels or dolly wheels. But anyway, so building it with the Werner, and all the cowl flaps are operational and everything, and put a lot of work in. That's 3 years into the project. And the canopy was a real challenge. I got somebody to blow above it, welding the frame, getting out all to fit. And it's just been a fun project. I got Kathy standing there so you can get an idea of the size at 60%. And what's beautiful is almost all the people, when you take almost all the airplanes that you scale down for Warbird, you can't scale its pilots down. So the airplane ends up with a bigger canopy than scale or wider. You got to change it to fit, especially like a Spitfire, which is, I've got to fly a Spitfire about 4 years ago when I was in England, and I met a guy in a pub that had a Spitfire, and when he found out, he says, "Oh, I got a picture of the GB with your signature framed in my house." And I said, "What are you flying?" He said, "A Spitfire." And Richard Grace, and I went, "Oh God, a Spitfire is so beautiful, this and that." And he goes, he had a big pint of beer. "Well, you want to fly it?" And I'm like, "Are you kidding?" So I got to fly a Spitfire when I was over in England. But anyway, it was 1,610 horse Lancaster engine in it, V12. It was really fun. But anyway, but the P-47, that's a scale size canopy. 44 inches is 60% of what they really had. And the cockpit's 30 inches wide between the rails. This is 20, which is the same as an S1. So at least we fit in it. I did have people there go, "How do you get in that?" Well, it's got room. So that leads us toward the end here. So I'm currently still working on the P-47. There's Sean D. Tucker, who Kathy flew with. He knows, he always calls Kathy, whenever he sees, he says, "Dr. Hertz." He has a way of putting it. And me and stuff. And I don't mean this a pat on the back or anything, but I'm incredibly proud that an airplane I've built now is hanging in the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C., in the main entryway, even before you get to the Wright brothers airplane. But as you come around the corner, there it is. There's the Cessna 180 that the gal flew around the world, and a bunch of stuff. And I think Patty Wagstaff stuff's here, some of it. But anyway, it's hanging it right in there. So you just come around the corner, and it's just boom right there. So the Challenger 3, he retired. It's when he turned 70, he decided, but he's put together a 4-ship flying the new monoplane, the Game Bird. He's going to be on there. He moved from solo to formation now because it's a little less G-load, high zoot. So that's through my life now. If I did a talk on just the Jordan experience, that's like, takes me a long time to good. So I have, Jack said, when we got Jack Hallett back into flying, he said, "You have given me a whole new chapter in life, at 95 to 100. And he flew everything. He flew in. We introduced him to Lorenzo that has the L-39. He flew the front seat, did the whole flight. It's on YouTube. He does the whole flight in an L-39 at 98 years old. And the only airplane Jack did not fly in World War II was a Mustang. And we finally got him in the Collins Mustang when he was 98, and he got to fly the Mustang. And when he got back and he got out, he says, I said, "Well, Jack, what do you think now? You finally got to fly a Mustang," because he flew the P-38, P-47, P-39, and P-40 in World War II. And he goes, "Too damn heavy on the ailerons." And he said, "I could roll the P-47 with one arm on the stick." I said, "In World War II, Jack, could you get in and out of the P-47 by yourself?" He said, "Well, yeah, I climbed up and climbed in it." I said, 2 guys to get you in and 2 guys to get you out of the P-47. Now you think you might have lost some strength in your arms, and he couldn't pull himself up. So he learned. He said, "I had to roll it with both hands," but he was rolling it and looping it. And Jack flew when he was 100.5. He flew a Stearman, did the takeoff, went up, did loops and snap rolls and stuff, and then died a year later. But anyway. That we had such a great time. So what I kind of showed you here, just hit on a bunch of chapters that I've had in my life, and I'm having the best one now, I think, because I'm married to a woman that flies airplanes with me, and we go everywhere. We got a little Sea Ray. We did build a Lancair 4P turbine, which we just sold, but we did fly it 330 hours and went all over the country with it. And so we got to own, I know it's not a pure jet, but we got to own a turboprop. We had our own private jet, so to speak, that went 300 knots, and we could go out to Oregon to visit our family in a day, and stuff. And and stuff. So, but we finally decided we weren't using it enough. COVID kind of shut a lot of that down. You know, we didn't feel like traveling, and then it just got to the point where it's like we just don't. We fly it about every other month now, and it's just not an airplane to sit around. So, but we'll replace it with this and go just have fun and stuff. Is there any questions?
How do you both get in there?
Oh, you know, I keep building single seat airplanes because that way I don't have to make an excuse to take somebody. Everybody wants to go for a ride all the time. Like, you know, when I had the S2, hey, you're going flying, you know. That's a good question. Well, she gets to fly it and then I get to fly it. We'll just have to decide which one we're going to take for the day. And that's what's fun is Kathy's definitely capable of flying anything. She has more solo time in the turbine Lancer than I do because we used to fly it. I was doing a lot of pre-purchase inspection on aerobatic airplanes, especially Pitz's or Christian Eagles, things like that. And I would ferry the airplane if the guy bought it back, and she'd bring the Lancer back. And I remember we bought it. Remember when we went and got that Model 12 Pitts, and you took off in the Lancer, and I took off right behind you in the Model 12. And this is out of Bloomington or something, Indiana, up there. But anyway, my first stop was I just made it into Tennessee. I run into the FBO, and you know I did 192 nautical miles. We were 678 nautical miles when we left. I run into the FBO, and I literally took off behind her. Asked the gal, "Do you have flight aware here?" And I look up 401 Kilo Sierra, and so she does, and she goes. I said, "Where is it?" She says, just crossed Valdosta, Georgia, 21,000 feet, doing 297, I think." I said, "Oh man, before I can get gas and push this thing back, she's going to be parked in front of the hangar at Leesburg, you know, because by then you're starting your letdown. You're really going to go." But anyway, it was a fun airplane. I'm glad we had it. But anyway, any other questions?
Steve, did you say that was your latest project?
This is my latest. And I'm building the wings right now.
My son Christopher met you at the bookstore in Lake Sumter, and he said, "I want to see your latest project."
Yeah. Well, if you get by Love's, you're always welcome to stop by and take a look. I'm building the wing ribs. I got the wings are pretty well done. The spars, the leading edge ribs. I have the gear in it. I had it working and folding and stuff. But there's a false spar hooks right there, so I'm building the ribs. Yesterday I built the first two that start working this way to put the false spars for the flap and the ailerons. And I started the wings after Sun and Fun, so I've been really going.
Yeah, just a year or two ago we were.
The tail's done.
The tail's all done, yeah. The rudder, when I put on display, I did stick the rudder on, but the horizontal tail, we didn't have enough room in the booth. But the tail, the fuselage tail, that's pretty well done. The engine's hanging on it there. I mean, there's plumbing to go and stuff. I got the electronic ignition put in there and stuff, but
We were in Love's Landing a couple of years ago. I think you were out of room in your hangar, and you had borrowed the neighbor's hangar for one of your pit specials.
yeah. Well, our Sea Ray's in Anita's hangar right now, and the P-47's. It's a big airplane, or even at 60%, it's a big airplane, so it's kind of taking up a bunch of room in there now because I wanted to stick the spars in and set the dihedral and everything, so I need more. Yes?
What was the guy's name that was 100?
That flew Jack Hallett, and there's a lot of stuff on YouTube.
That's what I wanted.
And if you think of Hall ETT, like HALLETT, and everybody loved him. I mean, people that met him, and his last words at about 2 p.m. was to one of my friends overheard, and then he passed away like 7 the next morning. Was I'm going to have them all smiling when I get there, And he had an infectious smile. Everybody seemed to be happy around him, and he had quit eating, he had quit drinking, and everything. He was in a nursing home. And where they were just wetting his lips. It was all, they knew he was going downhill. The nurses came in. Now that we're all adults here, the nurses came in, or the help, I guess they're not nurses, but anyway, the staff. And this gal had to kind of bear hug him and pick him up because the other one was changing his pants. And she kind of had him facing forward right about here. And my friend Joe that was with him says, Jack he was really out of it. He just finally kind of smiled, and he said, he said, I never thought I'd be in this position with my pants down again. And that was Jack. Yeah, that's just like when they got him out of the Mustang. One of the two guys taking him out of the P-51 came over to me and said, you know your friend Jack there? Yeah. He said, well, I was helping him out of the Mustang. You know what he said when we're undoing the straps? He said, for God's sake, hurry up and get me out of here. I might get lucky tonight. I'm a Mustang pilot. So, favors with the girls. So, anyway, that's why we ended up loving the guy. That's why I probably would have never built this as a project if it wasn't for Jack. But I'm going to finish it. We'll paint it up the same and everything. And I just want to go out in a hangar. Hopefully I keep it in our hangar, but anyway, and just be able to say, good morning, Jack, We really love the guy. He was an amazing human being.
Tell him about Floyd Blair.
Oh, yeah, and then last Saturday, Jack was born November 17th, 1920, and so he'd be 103 this November. And I had a guy get a hold of us and said, hey, we had at Leeward Sky Ranch, we had our parade, our 4th of July parade, and there was a guy shows that lives in Ocala. He's 102, almost 103, and he flew P-47s, he did 100 missions and stuff, and he wants to come out and see your project when we told him about it. So he showed up, and Floyd Blair, and there's actually a little bit on him too. And he came out, he never flew after World War II, but he did his missions and a bunch of stuff, and he's really with it. And we had a really good visit. And he said, "Are you really going to fly this when it's done?" And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "Well, give me a call. I want to come out and watch." So hopefully, I will have a guy. And he was born 2 days before Jack, so he was November 15th, 1920. My dad was January 1920. So, I don't think I'm his father figures, but they're, it's kind of. I think. My dad was 89 when he passed away, but I look and I go, man, this is how old he'd be if he was still hanging in there, But anyway, that's kind of, I just love building, and I don't feel, I just feel life went because I did what I did. I don't feel like I'm some kind of genius or this or that. I just was in, like the deal with King Hussein, I was just being at the right place at the right time and then doing it. I mean, having an opportunity and go, I don't know if I should do that, because I jumped at any opportunity, and I'm still alive somehow. I did fly Grumman Ag Cats for a while, spraying, there's all kinds of different things, Flew air shows for 27 years, did inverted ribbon cuts. I still think I could go out and do an inverted ribbon cut right now. I'm not going to, but I still feel my flying skills are there, but I probably wouldn't see the ribbon as good. Just like it's a little harder to weld now. And when I started welding around the leading edge of the tail there, that was all done in an English wheel to get the compound and hand hammered around. And then it's anybody that welds here, but it's 25 thousandths welded, aluminum welded, butt welded together and stuff. So, but now it's just harder to see and than it was when I was 20 something welding. But you do what you do. Got arthritis. I'm trying to straighten this finger, started tearing it on me. So it's supposed to help. It seems to be. Got my grip back. I was getting to where I was using the trigger on the air drill this way because this one hurt. Well, then this one just stuck out all the time. So now I'm doing physical therapy on it. Now it's working again. So hopefully I can keep going. Well, thank you for inviting us, and looks like it's not raining yet, and we can get home. It only takes us 20 minutes.